The men at the port in San Francisco had called her wild, a word spat like tobacco juice. They said it because her eyes, dark and deep as a winter well, held no fear of them. They held nothing at all. She stood on the auction block, a slip of a woman in a borrowed dress, her hands bound not by rope but by a contract written in a language she could not read. Her name was Mai, though no one had bothered to ask. To them, she was cargo, a problem to be sold. Asher Clayton watched from the back, his face a mask carved from prairie granite. He was not there for a wife. The place in his heart for a wife had been filled with cold earth for years prior. He was there for a solution. His ranch was failing, his daughter, Lily, was growing up feral in a house choked with dust and silence, and his grief was a winter that would not end. He needed hands to cook, to clean, to mend. He needed a presence to absorb the crushing emptiness. He paid the price in gold coin, the clink of metal on wood the only sound in the transaction. He did not look at her as a man looks at a woman. He looked at her as a rancher looks at a new piece of equipment, assessing its sturdiness, its potential for work. The journey back to his land in the high plains was a study in silence. The wagon wheels groaned, the wind whispered through the tall grass, but between the man and the woman, there was a void. He saw her glance at the vast, unending sky, at the sawtooth mountains that clawed at the horizon. He expected to see fear, the panic of a caged thing set loose in a space too large to comprehend. He saw only a quiet watchfulness, an unnerving stillness that matched the landscape itself. His homestead was a scar on the land, a testament to his neglect. The main house sagged, the porch steps were loose, and the barn door hung from a single hinge. Inside, the air was stale with sorrow. A fine layer of dust coated everything, muting the colors, preserving the moment his world had stopped. He showed her to a small room at the back of the house, little more than a closet with a cot. "Your duties are on the table," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. Then he left her, closing the door on her and the new, unfamiliar silence she had brought into his old, familiar one. He expected her to last a week, maybe two, before the isolation and the ghost of his first wife drove her away like all the others. He did not understand that Mai had already survived worlds far harsher than this quiet purgatory. She had come from a place of noise and loss, and this silence, this emptiness, was a canvas. The first thing she did was open a window. The breeze that stirred the dusty air was the house's first breath in years. She did not speak to him, and he did not speak to her. She moved through the house like a phantom, her soft-soled slippers making no sound on the wooden floors. She began with the kitchen. She scrubbed the soot from the stove until it gleamed, polished the tarnished cutlery, and organized the sparse contents of the pantry with a meticulous care that bordered on reverence. Soon, the scent of yeast and baking bread pushed aside the smell of decay. It was a scent Asher had not known since Sarah was alive, and it ambushed him, a fist to the gut. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching her knead dough, her movements fluid and certain. She did not look up. She did not need to. She knew he was there. Her presence was a quiet rebellion against the chaos he had allowed to fester. She mended the torn lace curtains with thread so fine the repair was nearly invisible. She found a patch of earth behind the house, choked with weeds, and began to coax a garden from the stubborn soil, her fingers working the dirt with a gentle persistence. She washed his clothes and hung them in the sun, and the clean scent of lye soap and wind clung to him, a subtle armor against his own despair. Lily, his 4-year-old daughter, was a ghost herself, a small, silent creature who mirrored her father's grief. She watched Mai from doorways and around corners, her thumb in her mouth, her eyes wide with a child's unfiltered curiosity. She had only known a world of greys and browns, of a father who was a walking shadow. Mai was a stroke of color, a sound in the silence. One afternoon, as Mai was tending her fledgling garden, Lily approached. She held out a clenched fist. When she opened it, a single, bruised dandelion lay in her palm. It was a treasure, an offering. Mai stopped her work, wiped her hands on her apron, and knelt to the child's level. She took the flower with a solemnity befitting a crown jewel. A smile, small and hesitant, touched Mai's lips. It was the first smile Asher had ever seen on her face, and it was like watching the sun break through a week of storm clouds. She took the flower inside and placed it in a chipped cup of water on the kitchen windowsill, where it sat like a tiny, defiant sun. From that day, a silent bond formed between the woman and the child. Lily became my shadow, following her through her chores, handing her wooden clothespins, her small face a study in concentration. Mai would speak to her in a soft voice, a language of gentle gestures and quiet humming that Lily seemed to understand perfectly. One evening, as Asher sat by the fire, sharpening a knife, Lily climbed into his lap, a rare act of affection. She was quiet for a long time, watching the flames. Then she turned her small face up to his and asked the question that shattered the fragile peace of his self-imposed exile. "Is she my new mama?" The words, so simple, so innocent, struck him with the force of a physical blow. He looked across the room where Mai was mending one of Lily's dresses by the light of a lantern, her head bent, her needle rising and falling in a steady, rhythmic motion. He had bought a servant, a pair of hands. He had not considered what she might become to his daughter. He saw the neat stitches, the clean floor, the warm bread cooling on the counter. He saw the dandelion in its cup. He saw the way his daughter now slept through the night without crying out. He had no answer for her. The silence that followed was different. It was not empty, it was filled with the weight of the child's question, with the dawning, terrifying realization that this woman was not just cleaning his house. She was rebuilding his life, and he had never once asked her if she wanted the job. He had simply assumed her compliance, her submission. He watched her now, really saw her, and for the first time, he felt a tremor of shame. He was a man drowning, and he had pulled her into the water with him without a thought for her own survival. That was the year the winter came early, a rabid wolf howling down from the mountains. It descended without warning, a churning wall of white that swallowed the sun and erased the world. The wind screamed against the clapboard house, rattling the windows in their frames, searching for any crack to invade. Snow piled in monstrous drifts, burying the fences, isolating them completely. The homestead, once a lonely outpost, became a fragile ship on a vast, frozen sea. The cold was a physical presence, seeping through the walls, breathing its icy breath into every room. For days, they were prisoners. The shared space of the small house shrank, pressing them together. Asher worked constantly, chopping wood, securing the barn, his body in motion to keep his mind from the creeping dread. Mai kept the fire roaring, cooked warm, hearty stews, and ensured Lily was bundled in every blanket they owned. The tension was a taut wire stretched between them. They were three souls adrift, their survival dependent on a fragile, unspoken truce. Then, the real terror came. Lily began to cough, a dry, rasping sound that echoed the scraping of the wind outside. By nightfall, a fever had taken hold. She burned under his touch, her small body trembling, her breaths coming in shallow gasps. Asher felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the storm. It was a familiar spectre, the same that had stolen Sarah from him. He saw it all again, the helplessness, the frantic, useless prayers, the life slipping away like sand through his fingers. He was paralyzed by the memory of his failure. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. But Mai was a rock in his storm of fear. While he paced the floorboards like a caged animal, she moved with a calm, focused energy. She drew on a knowledge that was ancient and deep, a wisdom passed down through generations of mothers and healers. She bathed Lily's forehead with snow-melted water, her touch infinitely gentle. She rummaged through the small pouch of belongings she had brought with her and found a packet of dried herbs. She brewed a pungent, steaming tea, holding the cup to Lily's lips and coaxing her to drink. She did not sleep. For 2 days and 2 nights, she sat by the child's bedside, a silent, unwavering sentinel. Asher watched her, his own exhaustion a dull ache in his bones. He saw the deep, dark circles under her eyes, the weary set of her shoulders. He saw her strength, a quiet, unyielding force that shamed his own frantic despair. He was forced to do the one thing he had never done, trust. He had to place the life of his daughter into the hands of this stranger he had bought and owned. In the darkest hour of the second night, with the wind shrieking its fury and the fire casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, he finally broke. He sat in the chair opposite her, the small cot between them, and the words came out, cracked and broken. It was a fever, he rasped, his voice raw. Like this. It took her so fast. The doctor couldn't get here. The snow, he didn't need to finish. The story was etched on his face, in the haunted depths of his eyes. He spoke of Sarah, of their dreams, of the life they were supposed to build in this harsh, beautiful land. He emptied himself of the poison of his grief, the guilt that had kept him frozen for full long years. Mai listened. She did not offer empty platitudes or words of comfort. She simply listened, her gaze steady and compassionate, offering him the solace of being heard. When he was finished, a hollowed-out silence filling the room, she reached into the collar of her dress and pulled out a small, silken pouch. From it, she took a single, intricately carved jade pendant, worn smooth with time. She held it in her palm. She did not speak of who gave it to her, or of the family she had been torn from. But in the way she cradled the small object, in the profound sadness that momentarily clouded her eyes, he understood. She was sharing her own loss, a grief as deep and as silent as his own. In that moment, in that storm-battered cabin, they were no longer a master and his contracted servant. They were two survivors, two lonely souls finding a flicker of warmth in the shared darkness of their pasts. The storm outside raged on, but within the walls of the small house, something had irrevocably shifted. The ice had begun to crack. By the third morning, the wind had died to a whisper. The world was reborn, sculpted in brilliant, blinding white. And inside, Lily's fever had broken. She was weak, but her eyes were clear, and she asked for a drink of water in a small, steady voice. The relief that washed over Asher was so immense it brought him to his knees. He looked at Mai, who was asleep in her chair, her head slumped to one side, her face pale with exhaustion. A feeling he couldn't name, a powerful, protective wave of gratitude and something more, swelled in his chest. When the roads were clear enough to travel, he knew he had to go to town for supplies. The larder was nearly bare. He stood in the doorway, ready to leave, then hesitated. He turned back. "Come with us," he said. It was not an order. It was a request. Mai looked at him, then at Lily, and nodded. The town of Redemption was little more than a muddy street lined with false-fronted buildings, a place where gossip was the main currency. As they walked into the general store, a silence fell. Eyes followed them, filled with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. Asher felt the familiar weight of their judgment, but this time, it felt different. It was not just his own reputation at stake. Whispers slithered through the air. Clayton and his China doll heard he bought her cheap. Henderson, a corpulent rancher with small, mean eyes, stood by the counter. He looked Mai up and down, a leering smirk on his face. "Well, now, Clayton," he boomed, his voice oozing disdain. "Finally got yourself some proper help. How much for a loan of her? My floors could use a good scrubbing." The air in the store crackled. Time seemed to slow. Asher, a man who had not raised his voice in 4 years, turned slowly to face Henderson. He did not draw the pistol at his hip, but his hand rested near it, a silent promise. His eyes, once dull with grief, were now chips of blue ice. "Her name," he said, his voice low and dangerous, each word a carefully placed stone, "is Mai. She is my wife. And the next man in this room who shows her anything less than the respect she is due will answer to me." A collective intake of breath was the only reply. Henderson's smirk faltered, his face turning a blotchy red. He saw something in Asher's eyes he had never seen before, not grief, but a cold, hard fire. He muttered an apology and shuffled out of the store. The declaration hung in the air, absolute and undeniable. Asher had not only defended her, he had claimed her, bound himself to her in front of the entire town. He turned his back on the stunned silence, his gaze falling on Mai. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes held a new light. Without another word, he walked to a shelf and took down a bolt of deep blue calico cloth, the color of a twilight sky. He placed it on the counter. It was not just cloth. It was an apology, a promise, a beginning. The ride home was quiet, but the silence had transformed. It was no longer a chasm between them but a comfortable space, a shared understanding that needed no words. That night, after Lily was asleep, Asher came to Mai. He didn't have the flowery language of a suitor. He had only the stark, simple truth. He held out his hand. In his calloused palm lay a thin, silver ring, worn and unadorned. It had been his grandmother's. It was not Sarah's ring, not a ghost to be worn, but something separate, something new. Mai, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he was only just learning to name. He didn't need to say more. His eyes asked the question his lips could not form. She looked from the ring to his face, and for the first time, she let him see past her guarded stillness, into the resilient, hopeful heart that lay beneath. She placed her hand in his, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. They were married not by a preacher or a judge, but by the light of a kerosene lamp and the silent witness of the vast, starry sky. The house was no longer a monument to what was lost, but a vessel for what was being found. Spring arrived as a promise kept. The snow retreated, revealing the green shoots in Mai's garden. The creek thawed and sang its rushing song. The world came alive again, and so did the people on the small homestead. Laughter became a common sound, Lily's high-pitched giggles as Asher taught her to care for a newborn calf. He smiled now, a true, easy smile that reached his eyes and erased the hard lines of grief. He was a different man, a man brought back from a long, cold winter. One bright afternoon, he stood leaning against a fence post, watching his daughter chase butterflies in a field of wildflowers. His gaze drifted to the house, where Mai was hanging laundry on the line. She wore a dress made from the blue calico, and it billowed in the gentle breeze. She felt his eyes on her and looked up. Across the expanse of the yard, their gazes met and held. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Everything was communicated in that single, shared glance, the history of pain, a crucible of survival, and the quiet, unshakable foundation of a love that had grown, like the stubborn wildflowers, in the harshest of soil. The men in the town had called her wild, thinking it a weakness, an untamable flaw. They had been wrong. Her wildness was her strength, the untamable force of life that could mend a broken man, raise a motherless child, and make a garden bloom in a wasteland of sorrow. Asher Clayton had gone to the city to buy a servant, a pair of hands to quiet the chaos. He had returned with a heart for his broken home, and in saving her, had found he was the one who was truly saved. The man whose heart had been frozen solid had learned to love again, not in spite of her wildness, but because of it.